Right, 45A. Another chapter coming up soon. At a Daf Yomi share near you. Steve is he's back in tomorrow morning. Okay. Here we go. So Kadshe Ovdei Kochavim, the offerings of idolaters, could be referring to non-Jews in general. Ein chayav alein mishum pigul no servitame ve'ashos mechut pater. So a whole slew of transgressions that we Jews will have, one of them being our favorite topic is pigul. Then we have no sar if the offering is left over, or if we eat it in a state of impurity, or if we slaughter it outside pater. Now, there are a select few offerings that a non-Jew could bring. A nadarim and a nadav, voluntary offerings, a voluntary ola offering, they could bring. It says, we say by Shani Yom Kippur, Ki Beisi Beis Tefillah Yikarei L'chol Amim, that the Beis Hamikdash is a place where all nations come and pray. So nowadays it means praying, but back then it meant offerings. So they could bring a select few offerings. Those offerings, though, we're going to bring scriptural sources that they are not obligated if they have the following list of invalidations, such as pigul and nosar and tameh and slaughtering it outside its prescribed area. That's all divrei Rabbi Shimon. However, Rabbi Yossi Mechayev, Rabbi Yossi says they are obligated. So a lot of scriptural proofs there. Not so much logic. Taner Rabbanan Kadshe Ovdei Kochavim lo nanin v'lo molin, the offerings of a idolater lo nanin v'lo molin, you can't get benefit from them, but there's also no me'ilah. I'm assuming it's referring to them themselves, not us. Okay, we'll see. Lo nanin v'lo molin. The ein chayav alein mishum pigul no sar v'tameh. So it's referring to them or us? Probably us, no? Or maybe them. It applies to everybody. I assume it was referring to them, but now I'm thinking about it, maybe it refers to us too. So,
there's no biblical prohibition against deriving benefit.
Yeah, I'm sure it's referring to not just them, but us also. Let's see. Lo nanim v'lo molin ve'ein chayav alein mishum pigul nosar v'tameh ve'ein osim tamura ve'ein mebi nesachin aval korbanon ton nesachin divrei Rabbi Shimon. So their offerings, there's no obligation of pigul nosar tameh, pigul, and leaving it overnight has its prescribed time. Tameh if you're a state of impurity. And you eat the meat. Ve'ein osim tamura, you can't do tamura. Someone's referring to us. The Ainos and Tamura, because these things don't apply to them, but we'll see. The Ainos and Tamura, you can't do Tamura, meaning you can't take its offering and exchange its sanctity on another offering. It's not going to work. The Ain may be in the second that they, the non-Jews, cannot bring their own libations, voluntary libations, but with their offering of al korban and ton nesachim, their offerings do require nesachim libations, and therefore you can bring it. But voluntary libations they cannot bring. That's all Rabbi Shimon. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Roani B'Kula Lahachmir. I think we should be machmir, meaning on all of these. Why? Shenemar B'Han La Hashem. At the end of the day, it says for God. This is also for God. Once it's for God, it's going to have all of these restrictions like a regular sacrifice would have. So that is the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. So he doesn't really agree that there's the dispensations for a non-Jewish offering. However, that's only that which the first opinion said, that which the Tanakama said, that there is no me'ilah. That's only by offerings themselves. But things you want to donate, its monetary sanctity to the temple, aval bekache the kabayis, things that are for the upkeep of the temple, there will be me'ilah, and we'll see a source for all of this right now. Lo nanim lo molin, those offerings of the non-Jews, you can't benefit from them. However, there's also no prohibition if you do, called me'ilah. So what does it mean? No, you can't benefit. Lo nanin, that's midirabanan. That's a rabbinic prohibition. You cannot benefit from their offerings, just like you can't benefit biblically from any other offering. V'lo molin, and there is no me'ilah. Why is there no me'ilah? What's the proof that there's no me'ilah? Chet mitruma. It says the word chet by me'ilo, which means you transfer the same, which means you benefit improperly from something holy. And it says chet by truma. And by truma, it says the truma ksiv b'nei Yisrael below ovdei kochavim. By truma, it says that you have to be only from the tribe of Israel, b'nei Yisrael, and not anybody else. So therefore, there's a requirement that truma is only for the Jews, and there you learn chet from truma. So to teach you that by me'ila, it's going to have the same qualifications as truma will be, and therefore it's only for the Jews and not for other offerings. Yeah, so benefiting from a non-Jewish offering is excluded from the prohibition of me'ila, because by truma it says you cannot profane the holy things of the Bnei Yisrael. It sounds like a holy thing of a non-Bnei Yisrael, so you could profane it biblically. Rabbinically, we say that you shouldn't do it. We prohibit it. Okay. The ein chayavin alav mishum pigul nosar b'tamei. Also, by their offerings, there aren't the restrictions of pigul, nosar, and tamei. Pigul, we know. Nosar, if it gets left overnight. Tamei, if you are in a state of impurity. Why my time of the asi pigul avon avon minosar? Because of exera shava. It says the word avon, which a sin and iniquity by pigul, and it says that same word avon referring to an avera one does in the section of nosar. The asi nosar chil mituma, and nosar we learn out of exera shava from tuma. And by tuma it says ubetuma ksiv b'nei Yisrael of the in the section of tuma there it says it's referring to only if you're in a state of impurity you cannot eat the sacrifices of while you're in a state of impurity, only of the ones of Bnei Yisrael, not the ones of the non-Jews. So since there's pigul is learned out of nosar, and nosar is learned out of chilul, learned out of tuma, and by tuma it says Bnei Yisrael. Fine. Now it says that ain't osin tamura. You cannot exchange the non-Jews offering onto another offering. You can exchange its sanctity. Why not? My time. The iskish tamura la meiser behema, because tamura is compared to meiser behema, the 10th animal that you give to the Kohen. Who meiser behema iskish la meiser dagan, and meiser behema is compared to meiser dagan, referring to the actual produce you have to give meiser from. And by meiser dagan it says b'nei Yisrael below they kochavim. By meiser dagan the verse says that you give the meiser, it's meiser b'nei Yisrael you give. So b'nei Yisrael you get meiser specific to the produce of the b'nei Yisrael, not the non-Jews produce. So therefore you could learn tamura from meiser behema, the 10th animal. Meiser behema is learned out of meiser by produce. By produce it says b'nei Yisrael below ovdei kochavim. What's the problem? You can't have a double hekish when it comes to the section of sanctity. Anything to do with sanctity, with sacrifices, a double hekish doesn't work. We'll see. I think we're going to see more about this coming up. Yeah, soon-ish. Emphasis on ish. So, how do you learn a hekish, which is one of the ways we derive the Torah? How do you learn that it's a double hekish? Why you're learning tamura from meiser behema and meiser behema from meiser dagan. That's two hekishes. Now, every hekish, right, is teaching you something. So you have the teacher and the student, right? You have a section in the Torah which is compared to another section to teach that section certain laws. So you have the teacher and the student, so to speak. So now through a subsequent hekish. That's a double hekish that you can't do. If it's in the world of sacrifices, if it's in the world of kachim, of sacrifices. However, what if you go after the student? Meaning, you can't be taught one thing and then use that and then be taught something else. But what if one of those things that you're being taught is not in the realm of sanctity? So, for example, let's see right now. Hanich lamandam rabasar malamed azlinan, lamandam rabasar lamed azlinan, ma'ika lemeimar. Sorry, the other way. According to the opinion that the double hekesh is limited to, you can't teach something twice. So then we understand why, because Meiser Dagan, giving your produce to the Levi, those things aren't considered, so to speak, kutchin. They're not like have to do with sacrifices. You give your tenth. The tenth of your produce goes to the Levi. So how does this double hekesh working? It's Tmura, which is involving sanctity, is learned out of Meiser Behema, which is giving your 10th animal to the Kohen. Those are both involving sanctity. So Meiser Behema is teaching to Tmura, and it only applies to Jews. Now Meiser Behema is learned from where? Is learned from giving your 10th of your produce to the Levi. That's not a have to do with sanctity per se. That doesn't have to do with like holiness by sacrifices. So if you're going after the teacher, well, the teacher is giving your 10th of your produce to the Levi. That's not something which is specific to sanctity, to kutchin, to holiness on the offerings. So since that's the teacher, that itself is not considered in the section of sanctity. Therefore, it's only viewed as one hekesh, not two. But if you go after the student, so hold on, Meiser Dagan, giving the 10th of your produce, teaches that your 10th animal has to go to the Kohen. So that is relevant to holiness, the sanctity, to the section of Torah called kutchin. So this first student, right? So A teaches B. A is Meiser, giving your 10th to the Levi. That's not involving holiness by sacrifices. But it teaches that your 10th animal, that whole section of giving your 10th animal to the Kohen, which does involve sanctity, is only relevant to the Jews and not to the non-Jews. That subsequently teaches you to Tmura, which is also relevant to this section of sanctity. It teaches you that the whole section of Tmura only applies to a Jewish offering and not to an idolatrous, not to a non-Jewish offering. So in the, let's say A, B, C, D, right? So, or let's say A, B, C. B and C are both involving the world of Zevachim, the world of sanctity. Meiser Behema, the 10th animal, and Tmura. So if you go after the teacher, A teaching B and B teaches C. So if you look at the teacher, A is not involving sanctity. So therefore, it's not a double hekesh in the world of sacrifices, of sanctity. It's really one's involving something mundane, the Meiser giving to the Levi. But if you look at the student, so B and C, both B is learning from A that it only applies to a Jewish offering, and C is learning from B that Tmura only applies to a Jewish offering. Both B and C are both in the category of kutchin, of sacrificial offerings, of holiness, and therefore they're bound by the rule, which we have to see more about, that a double hekesh does not work. So, Michael Amemar, Ella, we have to say it like this: Meiser Behema is a chova she'ein kavua lazman. Meiser Behema is an obligation, but there's no set time for it. Whenever your 10th animal gets counted, it gets given. So there's no set time. It's not like on Pesach you have to bring an offering. On Shavuos you have to bring an offering. So Meiser Behema is a chova she'ein kavua lazmanhu. V'chova she'ein lazman kavua Yisrael Meiser odekam lo Meiser. So the fact that Meiser Behema, the 10th animal, is only referring to the Jews' offering and not the non-Jews' offering is not because we learn it out from the 10th of your produce has to be given to the Levi. No. Look at the section. That section itself is something which has a set time, which does not have a set time. However, it's an obligation that does not have a set time. The non-Jews' offering are nidarim and nidavos, are voluntary offerings. They never have obligatory offering. They can offer if they want an Ola offering, but they're never obligated to bring an Ola offering. So the section of Meiser Behema is talking about an obligatory offering. By definition, the non-Jews offering is only limited to voluntary offerings. Therefore, we would never think that that section is referring to a non-Jews offering. And when you teach it to Tmura, so you're limited to whatever it's talking about, and it's only talking about obligatory offerings, and therefore and therefore, by Tamura, you'll know that it only applies to Jews' offerings and not to non-Jews' offerings. Yeah. Okay. The Ein Mevi and Nesachim. Even though they can bring voluntary offerings, they can't volunteer their own libation offerings. How do I know? Ezrach. Sorry, Ezrach. It says Ezrach once. Ezrach, a resident. In Parsha Shlach, it says, Kollel Ezrach Yesakacha. Someone, a local, a resident, a local. A native, yeah. Ezrach, nowadays I think it means a citizen. So Ezrach, maybe Nesachim, maybe Nesachim. I mean, only a citizen, only a native, only a Jew can bring the libations and not a non-Jew. Maybe you would think that he's excluded entirely from the whole section of libations. Even when he brings his offering, then you don't bring libations with it. No, Kacha teaches you that that once you're obligated to bring the offering, it comes with the libations. You have to bring it like this. So since the Ola offering has libations with it, if a non-Jew volunteers to bring an Ola offering, he has to bring libations, but on his own, for a not Ola, just to bring another one of the, like a flower offering that has libations, that he is excluded from. Amar Rabbi Yossi Roani bekulam lahachmir. Rabbi Yossi is strict by all of these things that the non-Jews offering are excluded from. Rabbi Yossi is strict because, so let's see. So, and then we ended up saying the Mishnah. We ended up saying because, the reason why Rabbi Yossi is strict because it says La Hashem, anything for God is included. All these restrictions are included. But then the Bryce ended up saying that this opinion, which excludes all the non-Jews, all these restrictions from the non-Jews offerings, that's only by things that the offering itself has sanctity. But things regarding a lower level of sanctity, such as the Bedek Habayis, the upkeep for the temple, so there, even if a non-Jew donates something for the upkeep of the temple, that there will be Me'ilah, that you cannot misuse. So their offerings, biblically, are not subject to Me'ilah, but their donations for the upkeep of the temple is subject to Me'ilah. The question is, why the split? How do you know? What's the source that you split? If there's no Me'ilah, should be no Me'ilah at all. If there's yes Me'ilah, it should apply across the board. Why does it only apply to things that the thing itself has sanctity and not just its monetary worth is being donated to the upkeep of the temple? What is that split? So my time ki gomer Me'ilah chet mi truma. It's dumya de truma, the kadisha kedusha seguf. Aval kedusha's bedek habayis, the kedusha's damim lo. Because we're learning out Me'ilah from truma that a non-Jew is excluded. Now look at truma. Truma, the food itself is what's holy, not its monetary sanctity. So since there the food itself is holy, and there it says that it only applies to Jews, not to non-Jews. When you learn that to Me'ilah, the prohibition of benefiting from something holy, it's limited to where it came from. Just like by Truma, it only applies, it itself has sanctity. So therefore, when you teach it to Me'ilah, it's only going to apply to things that they themselves have sanctity and not things that they're monetary, that were donating their monetary value to the temple. Those things had never been excluded from getting benefit from it. So if the non-Jew donates something for the upkeep of the temple, you can't use it as your toy or whatever you want to use it for. That is excluded, and therefore you will be liable. That is not excluded, and therefore you will be liable for Me'ilah. Okay. More things relating to the difference between the Jews and non-Jews offerings. Tanurban and Dam Shenitma. Let's say you have blood that got contaminated, the zarka, and you threw it up on the altar anyways, even though it got contaminated. The shogeg hurtza, the page, the mazid lo hurtza. Interestingly, if you did it inadvertently, meaning you didn't realize it was impure, and you put it on the altar, it still appeases hurtza, like we say in davening ritzeh, right? We're asking Hashem that our offering should be appeasing to Him. Appease, Rat says to want, it should be wanted, it should be pleasing, it should be appeasing. So the mazid lo hurtza, if you know it's impure and you throw it deliberately onto the altar, knowing it's impure, that's not going to cause appeasement. What does that mean? Hashem said you can't do it, and then you do it. I'm doing it anyways. That's not so favorable, right? So b'med more in b'yachid, if an individual does that. Aval b'tzibur, if the whole congregation does that, so then bein b'shogig, bein b'mezid hurtza. Interesting. Even if you have a b'mezid lo hurtza, so why? It's a penalty. It sounds like it's of rabbinic nature that we say does not appease. However, if you have a that's only if the individual does that. Aval b'tzibur, I guess tzibur means here. I don't know. Doesn't mean though. It probably means a communal offering, right? To rent a communal offering. Yeah. Right. So a communal offering though, bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid, it is hortza. It does get appeasement still. It does atone, even though they knew the blood was impure and the Kohen put on anyways. For a communal offering, there is appeasement. However, by the idolaters, bein b'shogeg, bein b'mezid lo hortza. There is no appeasement whatsoever. Not inadvertently, not advertently. Like their offerings, there's no appeasement. Amar Rabbanan Kamei Rav Papa cannot. Who's this going like? The low Rabbi Yossi. It's not like Rabbi Yossi. Why? Rabbi Yossi, if it's going like Rabbi Yossi, he was the one that never excluded the idolater's offering from anything. Amar Bekulan, and he wrote Lahachmir. By all of them, he says that we're machmir. Whether it's impure, whether it's pigul, whether it's notzer. He says it says La Hashem. Anything that's for Hashem has all the restrictions and all the invalidation. No different. So we just made a difference that the blood that's impure and it gets thrown onto the altar, there's going to be a difference between a Jew's and a non-Jew's offering. So that can't be like Rabbi Yossi. Amar Papa, if you came Rabbi Yossi, no, it can even be Rabbi Yossi. Why? Shiny Hassam, the Amar Kra Lahem. Lahem below Odev Kochavim. When it talks about things being impure that are thrown onto the altar, the Kohen Gadol sits, his thing he wears on his forehead. That's the thing that atones for offerings that are impure. It's that if he's wearing that, some say even if he's not wearing it, let's say for simplicity's sake, he's wearing it, an impure offering gets appeasement. That's how it gets atoned. So even though it's impure and you can't do it, but if he's wearing his tzitz on his forehead, that itself will allow the offering to continue to get atonement. But it says over there, lahem, it only will appease to them and not to the idolaters. Lahem below the ovdei kochavim. Even though Rabbi Yossi says that a non-Jew's offering has no different than a Jew's offering, when it comes to impurity and it still being appeasing, that tzitz only atones for their offerings, the Jews, and not the non-Jews. Amrle Ravuna Breder of Nasan Rav Papa Elameyato. If that's true, Asher Heim Makdishim Hachanami Heim V'lo Ovdei Kochavim. If that's true, so when it comes to the offering by the section of impurity, it also says Asher Heim Makdishim. Only their offerings you cause a desecration. You should say theirs and not the non-Jews. But Rabbi Yossi says it's not true. Rabbi Yossi says that a non-Jew's offering has also the same violations if you're in a state of impurity as a Jew's offering. If that's true, how come if you throw the blood of a non-Jew's offering onto the altar, it will not cause appeasement? It can't be from the word lahem, because then the same should apply by the section that talks about eating the offering in a state of impurity. It says them and not the non-Jews. And yet Rabbi Yossi says that if someone's impure and he eats the non-Jews offering, it's still going to be a violation. Says the Gemara, okay, you're right. It must be Elamar Rashi, Amar Kral Liratzon. It talks about finding favor, and the verse talks about that the verse when it talks about the tzitz atoning, it says it's going to be liratzon. And it says it's going to be on his forehead, always liratzon lahem lifnei Hashem, to cause appeasement for them before God. Says the Gemara that who are people that have appeasement, that have favor in the eyes of God? That's specifically the Jews. The favor that we have to Hashem is different than the favor that the non-Jews have. So the Gemara says, Liratzo lahem, they're going to find favor in Hashem's eyes. The Ogdei Kochavim lapnei artzanenu. They have a different relationship with him, not one of necessarily like a father to a son, a different relationship. So therefore, they're not ones who are as favorable. Doesn't mean that they're not created in the image of God. It doesn't mean that they're bad. They're wonderful people as well. But in terms of the same way we understand that a worker is very valuable to us, a son is more valuable to us, right? So we have a special status of children. We have special favor in God's eyes that no one else in the world has. Okay. Dvarim, next Mishnah. Dvarim shein chayav aleim mishum pigul. Now, we mentioned in the beginning of this, not the chapter, but the previous Mishnah had a whole list of things that are not liable for pigul, right? All the things that don't have a permitter, right? Like the actual flower offering. You just put the flower on the altar. There's nothing that you do that permits something else, as opposed to a regular offering where you have the blood being thrown permits the consumption of the meat. Just by the way, in that Mishnah, I kept saying that I don't understand what it meant, that the blood itself is not subject to pigul. So I got clarity today. What it means is, if you have a pigul intent when you're slaughtering the offering, so the blood does not become invalidated. That's what it means. If you have the wrong intent during one of the previous services, let's say slaughtering, when you slaughter, you have in mind to eat the offering outside the right time, the blood does not become invalidated. If you throw the blood with the wrong intent, you're going to eat it outside the right time, and the offering will be invalidated. Why is the blood not invalidated? Because the blood is the permitter. It's the one that permits something else. But the rule is that only something else gets invalidated when it has a permitter, but the permitter itself is not subject to invalidation. Okay. Now, the Mishnah here says, even though you have a whole list of things that are not subject to pigul, you will still be obligated, though, if it's still under the violation of nosar, if you leave it over, past the prescribed time, and it'll be subject to the laws of impurity. If you're impure and you eat it, so then that's also going to be a problem. Chutz min hadam, except for the blood. The blood, now it's interesting. If you consume the blood in a state of impurity, or if you consume the blood after it's been left over for too long, you're not going to violate the violation of eating the sacrifice that's been around for too long, or eating the sacrifice in a state of impurity. But there's a whole other prohibition of consuming blood that you're gonna violate. We're not talking about that prohibition. That's a general prohibition. You can't consume blood, period. Any blood, not relevant to sacrifices. But specifically the prohibition of eating the sacrifice in a state of impurity, eating the sacrifice that was left overnight past its prescribed time. It's on day 4 now, and you want to have that burger. So that violation is not going to apply if you consume the blood. We'll see. It's all based off the verses. Now, Rabbi Shimon Mechayev, the davar shedar kolecho. He is going to obligate one for anything which it's normal to eat. Anything which is normal to eat. Aval ha'etzim, the wood that's brought up on the altar, or the halavona, or the frankincense, or the haktoras, special Torah, special Torah spices, special with all the different ingredients. So that we say in davening here, right? Pitum haktoras, all those ingredients, special thing that was brought in the base of Mikdash. Those things, one is not going to be liable if they consume it in a state of impurity. And the rabbis argue on him that those things will. Okay. How do we know all this? So, Tana Rabbanon, Yachol lo yechayav mishum tuma, ela al davar sheyesh lo matirin, bein la'adam, bein lemizbeach. There's a brisa that says, you would think, lo yechayav mishum tuma, you would think that one is not going to be obligated for the violations for when he is in a state of tumah, he cannot eat the offerings. You would have thought that you're not liable for the violation of consuming sacrifices in a state of impurity. Ela al davar sheyesh lematirin, except for things that have a permitter. Bein la'adam, bein lemizbeach. Basically, you would think that the tumah restrictions are limited to the pigel restrictions. Wherever pigel applies, tumah will apply. Wherever pigel doesn't apply, tumah doesn't apply. Why would you come to that conclusion? For the following reason. Uma pigel, just like pigel, shehu bekviya, hu biyediya achas. So pigel, when a person violates pigel inadvertently, he has to bring a set offering. He has to bring either the sheep or a lamb. Yeah, a female goat. What's a female goat? Yeah, either a sheep or a female goat. What's a female goat? A female goat.
I must not be in the right.
The first Gemara.
Yeah,
right there. You're right there.
yeah. That's talking about bringing.
Right, so what's the footnote says? What's the fixed one? Down to the footnote.
Oh, footnote.
What's the fixed offering? A sheep or a female goat, right?
That is offering liable. That was two stands and two would offer any Uma. Oh, a female lamb.
Oh, female lamb or a female goat. Yeah. So the pigel, shehu bekviya, I mean, you have to bring a set offering. We'll see in contrast to what we call the korban ola b'yorei. Depends on your financial status. But if you do pigel inadvertently, then you have to bring a set offering, meaning it has a set. It's in which is set, either a female lamb or a female goat. Ubiyadiya achas. Now, going back to the beginning of Shavuos, ubiyadiya achas is that you don't have to know, right? There's two kinds of having a lapse, right? There's you knew it was wrong, you totally blanked, you did it anyways, and you found that it was wrong, right? That's called having two lapses. That's really two yediyas. You knew it was wrong, you had a lapse, and then you knew it was wrong. That's two. One would be you never knew it was wrong, you did it, and then you find out it's wrong. So for pigel, you bring an offering even b'yediya achas. If you never knew that, you never went to Daf Yomi Zevachim, you never heard of pigel, and you had this wrong intention, and you find out afterwards that it's the wrong thing to do. You're like, oh no. So you still bring an offering for that. So that's two things. One, it's a set offering. Two, it's only with one knowledge. You don't have to have two knowledges, meaning as long as you know at the end you did something wrong, that's enough to bring an offering. V'lo hutter mechlalo. There's no such thing when, like, I don't know, most of the Jewish people did pigel, you can bring a sacrifice, right? By Tumah, we're going to see, right? If most Jews by Pesach are impure, you can bring that offering. So those are three things by pigel. So below hutter mechlalo, ain, and so it has these three things. Ain, these three, we'll call it restrictions, a set thing, even for one lapse, even if you have one knowledge you have to bring, and you never permit it. There's no time where it's permitted, such an offering. Ain chayam alav ella, and yet you're only obligated for pigel al davar sheish lematirin bein l'adam bein lemizbeach. You're only obligated when it's something which has a permitter for you or for the altar, right? Such as a regular offering, in contrast to the flower offerings, which don't have a permitter. You just bring the flower onto the altar. Now, that's all by pigel. Tumah has more leniencies. Shehi ba'ola b'yored. You can bring different offerings, depends on your financial status, not a set offering. And even when you knew about it in the beginning, even when you knew about it in the beginning, and then you had a lapse, and then you knew about it at the end, right? We still let you bring an offering to atone, even though you knew it was wrong in the beginning. That's still considered having a lapse. And v'hotra mechlala, there's times where it's permitted, because if most of the Jews are in a state of impurity, you could bring a sacrifice. Eino din she'eino chayiv ela al davar sheish lematirin bein adam bein lemizbeach. So it has all of these. It has all of these things. Should you not say that you're only obligated when you consume an offering that has permitters for you or for the altar? Talmud Lomar says the Brisa, Asher Haim Makdishim Li. It's only things that are Asher Haim Makdishim Li. It's only things that are anything. Asher, anything which is holy. It includes anything which is holy, not only things that are limited to these things that pickle is limited to. But anything which is holy, if you go and consume it in a state of impurity, you're going to be liable. Yachol miyad. When are you obligated? Right away, as soon as it became sanctified, and now you go and you consume it in a state of impurity, then you're liable? Or only after the blood has been brought on the altar, and now you have to consume, now you want to consume the meat, and you're in a state of impurity. Let's say it became pure, and then you go and you slaughter it and you eat it. Are you violating this prohibition? Or it's only once it's been brought to the temple and the blood has been sprinkled, now it's fit for consumption. Now, if you're in a state of impurity, you'll be liable. So yachol miyad, you would have thought as soon as it's in a state of impurity, as soon as it's sanctified, this restriction of eating it in a state of impurity will apply. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, no, yikra, only when you bring it close. So what does bringing it close mean? Amr b'Elazar v'chiyesh no ge'ashu chayav. Does bring it close mean if you touch it in a state of impurity? Meaning you came close to it? That's what it means. You touched it while you're in a state of impurity? For that, you're liable? We never found such a thing. What does it mean that you're going to bring it? It means, or come close to it. It means something was done to it that now it's fitting to be brought close to the altar. So what does that mean? Haketzad, yesh lo matirin, something which something happens to it, and now you can bring it on the altar, such as the blood being thrown. Once the blood is thrown onto the altar, now you're able to bring it on the altar. Once that happens, now you have a restriction. If you're in a state of impurity, you cannot consume this anymore. However, ein lo matirin, let's say it doesn't have a perimeter, like all of those things that pigel doesn't apply to, there, misha yikdash bekli, the flour offering. So once it becomes sanctified in a sanctified vessel, now it's something which you're able to bring up onto the altar. So at that point, if you go and consume it, it's going to be in a state of impurity. You're going to over the violation. So basically, after all the dust settles, the violation of consuming something in a state of impurity, you would have thought it's limited to wherever pigel is limited to which we learn, no, it applies to all offerings once they're fitting to be brought onto the altar. Whether you're a flour offering and you've been put into a vessel, whether you're a sacrifice and your blood has been sprinkled, once you are something which is fit to be brought onto the altar, at that point, if the person is in a state of impurity and they consume it, they're going to violate the violation of consuming sacrifices in a state of impurity. I guess we'll stop here. That wasn't such a way. That wasn't so way. Oh, okay.